an idea. The goal for today at all the quarterly luncheons is to encourage you to embrace and live God's principles in your workplace. You know, I heard, I was at something just a few weeks ago that really evangelization isn't going to happen so much in the churches. It's primarily going to happen through the workplace. So that's something to think about. I think historically we've kind of kept those separate. But if you really want to have an impact, you can just stay right where you are at work and just share your faith that way. And so that's why our IRC is here, is first of all, if the owners of the companies are setting a good example, you're going to attract a different type of person. There's just going to be, it just kind of all starts from the top down. So along those lines, I'd like to introduce Rick Box, who is president and founder of IRC. He's also a personal friend of mine. But let me tell you a little bit about Rick that maybe you don't know. He has a daily Integrity Moments email, and I'm sure there's a way to sign up for that somewhere, either on the, where is that? I think that was probably what you did on the QRC code. Okay. I've already done it, so I didn't see what it looked like. It's featured in over 250 radio stations. He also has a broadcast email that reaches as many as 2 million all over the world. He's authored 2 books and 3 Bible study series, so he's a pretty busy guy. Rick is also married to his lovely and lively, and if you know Kathy, you know it's lively, wife Kathy. They've been married more than 26 years. He's right here in the front. And they have, that is such a fitting word for her. Lovely and lively. They have 3 children, Megan, Jeremy, and Rebecca. So Rick, if you could come on up, and let's welcome Rick.
Thanks, Dan. Well, welcome everyone. We're just so grateful for how many people are here today and such a great turnout, and it's just exciting to have each and every one of you. And I just want to let's give Dan a thank you for being a great MC every time for these events. And we're also just so grateful we have so many volunteers that pitch in and help make this just a wonderful event and a wonderful time for you all to be here today. And so we're just grateful for all the people that help out with that. I just want to take a couple of minutes here with you because they were showing me the list yesterday of people that were coming today, and one of the main purposes that we have for these events is we want to be introduced to new people many times so that they can understand the whole faith at work message that we trying to communicate. And I was pleased to see that we supposedly have over 100 people here today that this is their first time at this event. And so let's thank all the first-timers here. We're so grateful for each and every one of you. But because of that, many of you probably do not know me or the work of Integrity Resource Center. So I do want to just spend a few minutes to kind of give you a glimpse into who we are. And you'll see up here on the screen, you know, we are a nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to building integrity and faith into the workplace. That's really who we are. But also, it's always important to figure out, well, why does somebody do what they do? And in the case of Integrity Resource Center, when you look at the business ethics of our community and our nation, I pulled out some stats. There's a 2011 business ethics survey that the Ethics Resource Center produces on a periodic basis. And so they're constantly looking at trends. And look at some of these stats. 45% of all the employees that they surveyed had witnessed misconduct in their workplace within the last year. 13% of the people in the workplace perceive that they are being pressured by management to compromise their ethics or their values for the sake of advancing the business. And then they also surveyed the companies as to the culture of the organizations that people work with. And they saw a big spike up. Actually, both of these last 2 percentages, they had a big spike up recently. And 42% of the people that they surveyed said that they were not working in a company that was ethical. That's a pretty staggering statistic. And it really speaks to the need for trying to build integrity in the workplace. But who better to do that than people that claim to be Christians? And unfortunately, many times, Christians are perceived in the marketplace not to be leaders in this area of ethics. And so our desire and the reason why we do what we do is we believe that if we can help train and equip leaders in the business community to take the leadership role ethically and to model that we can see just an entire transformation begin to happen. And so that's really what we're about. The vision that we have for IRC is, in my lifetime, I would like to see us be a part of helping over 1 million leaders to actually learn and model God's principles in their workplace. Now, in order for that to happen, we've been developing a plan and a strategy. We want to reach 100,000 of those by 2018. So we've got a lot of work to do and a lot of people that need to help for that to happen. So how do we do that? Let me show you a slide here. We believe that we have to first sow seeds because there's a lot of Christians that have a compartmentalized life. When Monday morning comes, they do not act anything like they did on Sunday many, many times. And because of that compartmentalization, we need to help sow seeds for them to understand what biblical truths are and how they relate to the practical daily life of the workplace. And so in that bucket there, you'll see events like this. We use this as a tool to invite new people in so that they can at least be introduced to some of the things that we're talking about and that they can hear great speakers that are living out their faith in areas of the marketplace. We also use our daily radio program. That helps drive a lot of traffic to our website so that people also can learn and engage with that. And then I do a lot of speaking and consulting and counseling with businesses to be able to help with that as well. And so out of that, sowing the seeds, then we have kind of 3 pathways for people. We know that some people are looking for a solution for their daily problem. And so we've got online resources, and we're really ramping that up with the bigger traffic that we're seeing through the radio program going to our web. We feel an obligation to actually increase and build the resource content available to people so that they can have the best biblically based, business-oriented content possible. And so we're building out a new platform. We have a new website that's scheduled to be up about October 1st. Next is the FIRE process. The FIRE process is a process that we can help people go through. And so there's stages in that. The first one is our FIRE assessment. It's a free self-assessment tool on our website that gauges how well you're doing in actually living out and modeling your faith. There's a FIRE covenant. It's a written covenant with God, making a commitment that you want to do things God's way. And then we have a small group study called the Fire in the Workplace Study. FIRE is an acronym that stands for Faith, Integrity, Relationships, and Excellence. And then we're building out an accreditation process and a coaching process so that we can raise up leaders like you to facilitate other small groups, to help model and mentor out in the marketplace. But also the third category is integrity solutions. We know that people also have needs in other areas of their business. And so we do a lot of corporate training that we can go in and help companies to be able to train their staff on some ethical principles that relate from a biblical standpoint. Also, we do a culture consulting plan that we go in and try and help businesses actually be trained and equipped to shape the culture within their organization, and counseling and speaking engagements that we do as well. And so that's kind of that's an answer to the some of the what we do and how we do it as well. And then what's it going to take? What do we need for this to move forward? We have a big, big vision, and a lot of work needs to be done. And so we need help from people like you. And so first of all, we need leaders. We need people that are going to learn these principles. They're going to model it and live it. and help mentor others. And some are going to feel led to actually facilitate small groups. Maybe that's in their workplace, maybe that's in their church, and they want to take a leadership role in this area. And so we were trying to raise up people to do that as well. Also, naturally, we're a nonprofit organization. It takes funding to be able to connect and reach people. We believe we are holding off on some things that we would like to really ramp up more quickly. And so in the short term, we need really to try and raise $100,000 to get us through some of these projects that we've been holding off on that relate to some of the web things that we're doing. And then we are working on kind of a capital campaign over the next 3 years that we're going to be building and working on soon. We believe it's going to take about $600,000 over the next 3 years. But with that, we believe that we can be, after 3 years, we could be at about 37 to 38,000 leaders have been trained and equipped in the way that we're talking about. And so that's just what it's going to take. And so I just want to kind of finish with some next steps. For those here today that this may be your first time and you're really not familiar with what we're talking about very much and you really want to understand and know a little more, I would say, first of all, you can go take our fire assessment online. And I think you can find information in your program today that gives you the web address. You can go take that. You will receive back scores on some sections there that you take and comparison scores of everybody that's taken that assessment. You can see averages so that you can kind of see how well you're doing compared to the averages. Also, another entry point that you might have if this is kind of a first-time exposure or you're newish to this organization, we do a lunch and learn event. And this is an hour, we buy you lunch, and we just kind of share a little more depth about who we are, what we're doing, and the dreams that we have for the organization. We have one of those events coming up. We want to kind of move around some, and we haven't had a lot of exposure in the Northland. So our next one on August 8th is going to be up by the airport, and Scarborough International, one of our sponsors, is kind of allow us to use their conference room, and so we will be doing one up there. With that QR code that you did, and if you happen to key in on that, it asks you whether or not you would be interested in a future Lunch and Learn. If Northland doesn't work for you, which for many of you it won't, we are considering doing one maybe the following day on August 9th in our offices in our training facility here in Overland Park. And so please note that if you want to do that as well. But the Lunch and Learn is a way to get engaged. Now, next, if you have been around IRC a little bit longer than that, and you're wondering what may be next for you, we're going to do a new workshop August 23rd, as mentioned in your program, called the Blueprint for Business, and that'll be probably done in sections. This is kind of part one on leadership principles that relate to a design for your business and how to do it God's way. And then also you might consider helping us fund our rapid growth in some of these projects that we're doing, if that's something that you're inclined or feel called to do. So anyway, that's just a real quick overview of Integrity Resource Center for those who may be here for the first time, and maybe some updates for those of you who have been here before. We are very grateful for each and every one of you to be here. Now, it's my pleasure and my opportunity to introduce our speaker. As I mentioned earlier, we had already planned, and actually there's some flyers on your table that are now somewhat obsolete, because we had planned for, in October, for Cindy Olson to come and speak at that event. But fortunately, she was planning on coming and being here today anyway, and so I called her last night and virtually said, instead of 3 months of prep, would you mind a few hours? And she was so gracious to step in and to do that for us here today. Let me just share with you a little bit about Cindy. Cindy, as she has mentioned, is from Wichita originally. And Cindy spent a long and lengthy career at Enron. And she actually managed to work her way up to be part of the top 20-member executive team with Enron, and she was the executive vice president over human resources. She's an author that wrote a book about her experiences there at Enron, and she has a different story to tell than what many of us has heard from the press over the years. And so I think you're going to be really interested in hearing what Cindy has to share. So let's please give a great warm welcome to Cindy Olson.
I'm still kind of writing my speech as we go. My husband and I moved here to Kansas City in January of this year. And we both, as Rick said, we both were from Wichita. We lived in western Colorado in the Roaring Fork Valley for the last 12 years, and we decided we wanted to come back to Kansas to be close to our family, but we just didn't want to live in Wichita because we'd lived in Houston for 23 years. So we moved in January, obviously unpacked the house. In May, I went to a breakfast that the National Christian Foundation put on, and I was introduced to Rick Box and Debbie Gooden. And I got to tell you, I feel like God was really working in my life with those two introductions because they've been invaluable. As Rick said, less than a week ago, we talked about me actually doing the speech in October. And I said, yeah, that'd be fine. I'll send you a few notes and we'll decide on what exactly you want me to say. Then on Monday, we decided that the title of my speech in October would be From Best to Bankrupt, the inside story or the lessons learned from inside of Enron. And then yesterday, like Rick said, at 5 o'clock to be exact, he called and he said, he left me a message on my cell. I didn't know who it was, so I kind of thought, who is that? And he left me a message on my cell. I have a crisis, call me. So I called him and he said, our speaker's sick. Can you come in and can you speak for us tomorrow? And so today I'm giving the talk that I was going to give in October. So bear with me because I was preparing for it just as we were speaking at the table. And man, do things move this fast in Kansas City everywhere? I can't believe it. I'm here in January and now I'm speaking in front of you and it's only been 5 months. When Rick put that, he told me the statistics that he was going to use, and when he put that up there, I'm going 42% of the companies that don't manage or aren't ethical. And you know what? It's kind of not surprising, and I think you'll see this through the story that I'm going to tell. I didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this speech, but I got to tell you, I've spoke a lot in the last 11 years, 12 years. I gave a keynote speech at the Human Resource Conference in San Diego a few years ago, and the title of the speech was Managing HR in a Crisis. And I could see the eyes on everybody's face when I was talking about what we went through, and I'm sure they were thinking, I hope I never have to go through that. And then I've given speeches at business schools and talked about ethics. And my favorite speech, though, was about a year ago, and I gave the laity sermon at my parents' church in Wichita. And I love to talk about my faith walk, and sometime I'd love to do that. But today I'm really going to talk more about Enron, what happened at Enron, and how integrity is so important. I'm going to do that by talking about my career, because you'll see that I knew what went on at Enron. I was there for 23 years, and I was there before Enron was even Enron. And then I'm going to share with you, through my experience directly with Kinley and Jeff Skilling, what happened, and and how my life's changed since living and breathing that nightmare, and what I think I can teach people from that experience. So I'm going to start with the DVD, because in 2001, December 1st, 2011, it was the 10-year anniversary of Enron's bankruptcy. And Scott Cohen, who maybe some of you know is a senior analyst for CNBC, he's a very good dear friend of mine, he decided he wanted to do a piece on Enron. And so I agreed to go to Houston and help him with this piece. I think it's going to give you a different perspective from somebody other than me, because I'm going to talk quite a bit in a minute. But it'll give you a different perspective about what happened to Enron, because I got to tell you, since I've been here, everybody's asked me if they've watched The Smartest Guys in the Room, and I tell them all, it's not the real story. So with that, let's roll the DVD.
Well, it's hard to believe, but tomorrow marks the 10-year anniversary of Enron's bankruptcy. The scandal rocked investor confidence and shocked the world, really. But many people who had close ties to Enron are using the anniversary to defend the company. Our senior correspondent, Scott Cohn, speaking exclusively with Enron's true believers. Scott, who are these folks?
They believe it in the company more strongly than ever, as you'll see. If you're like most people, the legacy of Enron is pretty well set in your mind. But these people insist you've got it wrong.
Enron has become the very symbol of corporate fraud. People like Ken Lay, Jeff Skilling, household names. But former Enron executive Scott Yeager says Enron should be remembered for something else, technology. He claims many of the applications we use today, streaming video, online apps, and cloud computing, all have roots at Enron.
All of them that you use routinely, you could find in our strategic vision document that we said, this is the future.
Hey, Scott. My name is Jeff Jensen, and I'm with the FBI here in Houston.
After Enron collapsed, investigators contacted Yeager.
You're not in any kind of trouble or anything and not a target of our investigation.
But he says they turned on him when he wouldn't turn on his bosses. Accused of helping misrepresent Enron's technology, he took his case all the way to the Supreme Court and won. Now, in his first TV interview, he wants to clear Enron's name, too.
The world doesn't know. The media and everybody else has made Enron evil and the Department of Justice good.
He's one of a small but increasingly vocal group trying 10 years later to tell another side of the Enron story. They include Cindy Olson, the former head of human resources, best known for a comment in 1999 she says was taken out of context.
Should we invest all of our 401k in Enron stock? Absolutely. Don't you guys agree?
Everybody burst out laughing. I mean, it was a joke.
Olson, one of Enron's first employees, says the scandal was a witch hunt.
Everybody was painted as criminals at the top of the organization, instead of trying to figure out what happened.
Video producer Beth Steyer, a former Enron contractor, has put their stories on a website called ungagged.net, which portrays Enron and its people as victims.
Not one of the Enron defendants got a fair trial because of vicious and deliberate prosecutorial abuse.
Leslie Caldwell, who headed the government's Enron task force, denies that.
I'm confident that the people who got charged deserve to be charged.
But 10 years and dozens of convictions later, some are still unwilling to accept the verdicts.
We have put a lot more about this online at CNBC.com, including the complete videos from '99 and 2000 of early cloud computing and movies on demand, plus a look at some of the faces of Enron. Where are they now, Brian?
Where are they? Can you give us a little taste of where some of these folks landed? I mean, I would imagine having Enron on your resume is a tough thing.
Not necessarily. You look at John Arnold, one of the most successful hedge fund managers. He was a former Enron trader. He's in Houston doing really well. David Duncan, who was the auditor for Arthur Andersen, was able to withdraw his guilty plea after the verdict was overturned. He's the chief financial officer of U.S. Pipeline in Houston. So it's not necessarily a black mark on people's resumes, and a lot of people still embrace it.
You know, Scott, this was fascinating. This was a really great piece. And I think what's interesting in all of these frauds that we've seen is good people and good ideas sometimes get dragged down with it. I mean, I can go back in any of the number of the ones I've done in the past, and there were seeds of good things in them.
Well, Arthur Andersen,
you know,
same thing.
You know,
Sure, Arthur Andersen, but also Enron. And you look at Enron now through the prism of 2008, and it looks a whole lot different. Some of the things that they were accused and convicted of doing are things that have gone unpunished on Wall Street. And a lot of the people down there say that Enron's biggest sin was being in Houston and not on Wall Street.
Excellent piece, as always. Scott Cohn, thank you very much.
Great.
Okay, so I just wanted to give you a flavor of maybe somebody else's opinion that was a little bit different than the normal person on the street. I want to start by going back and just briefly talking about my background so you understand kind of where I was at Enron when all this happened. I was actually in Omaha. My husband and I moved to Omaha, Nebraska in the early 80s, and I started with Internorth. And I don't know if you guys remember the story, but Ken Lay had combined several pipelines into Houston Pipeline, and he actually acquired Internorth in the mid 80s. Well, I really liked what he was doing. I'd been identified as one of the up-and-coming young women in the Inter-North organization. And so we had actually looked at some of the acquisitions that were being made in our energy business. And Ken Lay was one person that we were looking at because he was making a lot of strides in combining companies into a large pipeline. So I was asked early on in my career and early on in the Enron company as it became Enron to move to Houston. And not many people in Omaha wanted to do that, but since I hadn't been in Omaha anyway, I moved to Houston. And immediately, actually the person that asked me to move to Houston was Jim Rogers. And if you keep up with the energy business, Jim went on to be the CEO of Duke Energy. He just retired this year and gave the reins to a 56-year-old woman, so I think that's pretty cool. But Jim was the one that asked me to come to Enron and fix a problem that he had with his invoicing. And he was out trying to negotiate with producers their take-or-pay contracts. And he couldn't get them to talk to him because they wanted to talk about the issues on the invoice. So that was my first kind of re-engineering project that I did within Enron. And they saw that I was pretty good at it. I liked it, so they moved me around the company. And believe me, when you combine all the different companies that we combined, Florida, Houston, Transwestern, and Inter-North, there were a lot of cultures, there were a lot of systems, there were a lot of people that were duplicated, and so there was the re-engineering effort was something that kept me busy for a lot of years, and I got to see a lot of the company. Ken Lay became my mentor, but in the mid-90s, I actually had worked my way, so I was in charge of the back office of Enron Capital Trade. And that was our trading business. That was the new business that Jeff Skilling had been brought into the company to create, and I was in charge of the entire back office. And I remember sitting at a luncheon with Ken in 1996, and he asked me, because I was on the board of the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation, and we were at a luncheon for juvenile diabetes, he said, "Cindy, how do the traders treat people?" And I remember thinking about that and answering, well, you know, Ken, they treat them pretty rough, but boy, they make a lot of money for the company, don't they? And so he was already thinking in 1996 that our culture was changing. Because when we put all of the pipelines together, Ken made it a point to create a vision and value statement, what we wanted to become and how we wanted to behave. And our values were laid out very clearly. They were respect, integrity, excellence, and communication. Sound familiar? I think there's a lot of those same values in a lot of companies today. But I was also given the opportunity to be on what we called the Culture Committee. And it was influencers across the organization that would come together and ensure that our culture was being lived in the different divisions. But in 1997, I was in Enron Capital and Trade. I was working with the traders. I was running the back office. And Ken Lay asked me to come up to his office, and he wanted to talk to me about a new opportunity. And he asked me if I would consider running community relations for Enron. And I remember that day as well as it was yesterday. And I said to him, "Do you know what I do? I'm an accountant, and I'm running the back office of Enron Capital and Trade for Jeff." And he goes, "Oh, you'd be so good at this, though, because I want Enron to be known for its community involvement and giving back." And so I said, "Look, I'm not going to get in the middle of this one. I'm working for Jeff. You want me to come up here, you guys decide." Well, and so a week later, I was working in community relations. And so what he wanted me to do was, we were building our brand, we'd created our new logo, we're really focusing on our values and what we wanted to become in the marketplace. And Ken wanted me to help build that brand. In early 2001, I got to tell you that, let me go back and say that in 1999, after I took the job in 97 as the head of community relations, I got involved in diversity, and I got involved in a lot of things that involved human resources. And I always thought culture should be something that human resources work with the CEO to drive, and I was very involved in the culture. So in 1999, beginning of 99, I was actually promoted to the executive committee. I was one of the top 20 people at Enron, and I was in charge not only of community relations, but also of global community relations, but also of global human resources as well. And that was a great job. I loved it. But in early 2000, well, actually, in late 1999, early 2001. Sorry guys, I'm messing up with my dates, but it was early 2001. Ken Lay, we had just been named for the 6th year. We had just been named for 6 years the most innovative company in America. And he was getting all these calls from CEOs all over the country to come tell them how we created our innovative culture. And so that was my job. The first part of 2001, I was traveling the country, meeting with CEOs, and I prepared a great presentation about our culture. And I want to just share with you just a couple of things from that presentation. I would have loved to have had a PowerPoint for this, but bear with me. The first thing I started out with is they all knew. We had returned to our shareholders almost 350% in the last 5 years. And our earnings per share had increased 69% from 1997 to 2000. We had been named the most innovative company for 6 years in a row. Our quality of management was touted by Fortune as the #2 in the country. Employee talent was #4, quality of products and services #7. We were number 18 of the most admired companies and number 22 of the best companies to work for in America. And I talked to them about how we had created that culture. I was proud of it because all these accolades were certainly validation that we had done a great job. And what I talked about when I talked to these executives was this. There were 8 areas that have impacted culture. First of all were the values. And of course I talked about our values: integrity, respect, excellence, and communication. I touted that our executive leadership lived those values. We had a great external perception, which played into our culture. We developed employee ideas. We even created an incubator where we brought interns into the group to just build new businesses and create new ideas. We made it easier for the best and brightest to work there. I hear people talk about Google's benefits. We had Google Beat back in 2000 and 2001. We had everything. People got a computer at home. We had a child care center. We had a concierge. We had everything. So we made it easy for people to work there. We truly had a meritocracy. Our PRC was one of the best in the HR world. We had an internal open market for talent because if you ask people to innovate and something goes wrong, you've got to redeploy those people that were in new businesses. So we knew how to redeploy people into businesses if those businesses failed. And the final thing that we were good at, I thought, was diversity of talent and diversity of ideas. So that was what I was doing in 2001. Well, the first signs of trouble came in July of 2001 when I was involved in a cost-cutting exercise across the company. And the other thing that happened is we used our PRC process, our performance management process, in July of 2001 to actually cut people. And we'd never done that before. We had to lay off people because the tech bubble had burst. Broadband was hurting. Our retail business wasn't doing well, so we actually had to cut people. And then the real blow happened. Jeff Skilling resigned. He had just been promoted as CEO in February of that year, and it's August, and he resigned. Now, I had gone, before the world knew that Jeff had resigned, I'd gone into Ken Lay, and I'd spent a week in Colorado, and I decided I just didn't want to work for Jeff. He wasn't like Ken. Ken was one of these people that did definitely lead with biblical principles. He always said that he wanted Enron to be a place where people could use their God-given talents. And I got to tell you that I saw him every day live it. It wasn't just words, he lived it. So when I saw what Jeff was going to do to the company, I thought I really had to do some soul searching. Everybody was getting headhunter letters at that point, and I was getting a lot of them. And I just decided that I wanted to go do something else because I wasn't one of Jeff Skilling's fans. But I walked into Ken Lay's office that day, all ready to tell him that I was leaving. And he looked at me, and I didn't even have to mention Jeff's name, and he said, "He's leaving. No one knows it yet, and I need you to stay and help me rebuild the company." Well, what I didn't know, Ken had already accepted the CEO position of AT&T, and he had to step back in as CEO and try and rebuild the company. Just to show you what the employees thought of Ken Lay, after Jeff left and we had our first employee meeting, All Ken had to do was walk up on stage. We had 5,000 employees in Houston. They were sitting out there in the audience, and all Ken had to do was walk on stage, and they gave him a 3-minute standing ovation. He didn't say a word. But as we went through that employee meeting, it was clear that we'd gotten away from our values. That was pretty much most of what the employees were concerned about. And Ken asked everyone at the end of that meeting, if you have any concerns, let Cindy know. Thanks. I was inundated, believe me. But when I got back to my office that day after the meeting, Sharon Watkins was sitting in my office. And if you don't remember who Sharon Watkins was, she was the whistleblower. She had in her hand the infamous letter, and she was in my office showing me this letter, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is really, really, really important. So I set a meeting up with her so that she could go meet with Ken that next day. She moved out of Andy. She was working for Andy Fasta. I don't know if you remember who Andy Fasta was. He's the CFO that actually was the very unethical person that stole $50 million from Enron. And she was working for Andy, and Ken immediately moved Sharon into my group. It was then that the Wall Street Journal started asking a lot of questions about why Jeff Skilling had resigned. And it seemed like every day we were addressing something the Wall Street Journal knew and we didn't even know. So it was like, it was a ship going down. And the problem with what was out there and what happened, and this is what really happened. And I know people say, oh yeah, a run on the bank, but it was a run on the bank. And what happened was, the more the Wall Street Journal printed, the more they learned, the least confidence or the less confidence that Wall Street had in our stock. And our stock went down to a point where it was below the target stock where JP Morgan Chase and other big banks could call our paper. And without cash, we couldn't trade. So that's what happened. But it all stemmed from the fact that we had an unethical CEO that stole millions from the company, and that just pointed a huge red finger at our culture and the values that we proclaimed, and a big reason why Wall Street lost confidence. Now, after Enron failed, I was the first person that actually testified in front of the U.S. Senate and U.S. House. Most of the other executives at Enron didn't testify. They were facing criminal charges. I wasn't. I was the HR lady, so I wasn't facing criminal charges, but I was on the 401k committee, and they wanted to talk to me about what happened on the 401k. And so I was the first one to actually testify in front of the Senate and the House. And believe me, when I say testify, that's really not what happens. I really had to sit there and let them beat on me for 3, 4, 5 hours. I was coached that weekend not to say anything, because no matter what I said, I wasn't going to be allowed to really tell the truth. And if I was saying something, they wouldn't believe me anyway. So that was when I really learned that nobody was going to listen and nobody was going to hear the whole truth. I also testified in front of the grand jury that was formed to indict Ken Lay. I was called in front of the Labor Department 5 times to be deposed, and I was called in front of the Justice Department as well. And finally, I testified at the trial of Ken and Jeff. And in none of those places was I allowed to tell the good things about Enron or the truth. So that's why I wrote my book. And my book is about what really happened, but it's also about what a great company it was and how a great company like that could fail because of some people that didn't live the values. About the same time that my book was published in 2008, we had our financial crisis, remember that? And as I was getting ready to promote my book, one of the things that my publicist asked me to do is write some op-eds. And so my op-ed was printed in the Houston Chronicle on October, I can't remember the exact date, but it was October 2008. And I just want to share one of the first things that I talk about because it fits so perfectly here. I started out by saying I couldn't watch. I watched with interest to see all those people at Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers walking out with boxes. And I really paralleled what was happening there with what happened at Enron. And I said there were 5 lessons that we didn't learn from Enron. And you know, if the lawmakers would have really asked us what happened instead of trying to get us, we probably could have avoided the financial conflict. That was the gist of my op-ed. But the first thing, the 5 things that I talked about, the very first thing is integrity in individuals is important. And I want to read what I said, because this was 5 years ago, and this is so apropos right now in this setting. The concept of integrity was a cornerstone of the written values that Enron professed. Ken Lay wrote those values, and quite frankly, he lived them. Unfortunately, not everyone in the organization did. The culture that we thought we had at Enron was not the culture that existed in the entire organization. If the written values had been used in performance reviews consistently for everyone in the organization, including the executives, the criminal acts that occurred at Enron probably would not have happened. The few people who did commit criminal acts would have been fired before they could have done the damage. The issue that has to be addressed is, if people in the organization at all levels are not living the values that are supposed to be inherent in the culture, they should be fired. Even if those people are the same ones making lots of money for the company, they have to go in order to secure the integrity of the culture for the entire organization. I know that Ken Lay questioned whether everyone in the organization was living the values, including integrity, but because Enron continued to make money and do well, the values were ignored in some executives. Jeff Skilling once was quoted as saying, "Sure, Enron has a vision and value statement. 90% of the companies with vision and value statements make more money." Unfortunately, he didn't totally understand that living those values by each and every employee was what made a company make more money. And I go on to talk about personal gain drives personal behavior, because our stock options vested almost immediately, and that wasn't the right thing to do. That the political interference in what happened was a problem because of the Democrats and the Republicans, and George Bush had just won an election that nobody thought he should have won. Bankruptcy is a very lucrative business, and if you've ever been through it, the lawyers and the workout specialists, they don't care about the company, they just want their money. And then more government rules don't place or fix the problems. And if I say Sarbanes-Oxley, I think you guys will all understand what I mean by that. And then a company's risk culture is important. So those are the things that I wrote 5 years ago in 2008, and the Houston Chronicle printed on the front pages. And I think the issue of integrity is something that is extremely important and fits well here. So I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to cut something. Yeah, I'm going to have to cut. I was going to read, well, maybe I should, because I think this is important. Jeff Skilling did not live the values of the organization, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he was criminal. And when he was resentenced about a month ago, a lawyer in Houston that I think the world of, and he wrote a letter to Judge Lake in his resentencing, and I just really want to share what he said. He said, "My perspective regarding Mr. Skilling and Enron is different from most people who will write letters to you on his behalf. As a lawyer, I was deeply involved in the Enron case from the beginning. My first involvement was the representation of a prospective asset purchaser in performing due diligence on some of Enron's most valuable assets. I later represented 3 Enron executives who worked closely with Mr. Skilling, and I provided consulting advice to several defense attorneys in connection with the Enron-related criminal cases. These wide-ranging experiences in the Enron case, along with my 30-plus years of experience in complex business litigation and corporate organization, provide the basis of my perspective of what happened to Enron and Mr. Skilling. To this day, many myths still surround Enron. The main myth is based on what I